What an amazing book. It's not about dogs or cats. It's about pets, but not really pets, because what is a zoo? And what will it look like in the future? Emma Sloley has written a really extraordinary novel called The Island of Last Things. Emma, there are so many themes in this book. The first one that jumps out at me is the idea, it's a futuristic book, but not insanely far out in the future, I don't think, is your use of Alcatraz prison slash island as the setting for it. Now, when you wrote the book, the current American president's idea of repurposing Alcatraz was not in the ether. Of course, I think it's like many fly-by-night Saturday night ideas that he has, it seems to have stopped being brought up. But when you brought it up in your own mind, where did that come from? The idea that there is this really quite remarkable historical place that was used and then abandoned. And in your book, it has in the future become something very extraordinary. How did you get that idea? Or what was the germ of it?
Well, I guess I'd always been fascinated by zoos. And I think if you're someone who loves animals and loves zoos, you're always experiencing this dissonance between, wanting to go and see the animals and how much you love these beautiful creatures and the kind of acknowledgement of their sometimes grim reality and captivity. And I thought that tension was like a great sort of starting point for a story. And so once I knew that I wanted to have a zoo, the world's last zoo, I started thinking about where would this place be? And an island just made complete sense to me because it would need to be somewhere that is very isolated, that is difficult to breach, that could be easily fortified, and where that could be biosecure. And so an island made a lot of sense. And from there, I considered the idea of just inventing an island. Obviously, there's a lot of
Right,
amazing sort of fictional literary islands,
right.
but because the story is already speculative, set in this pretty dystopian near future, I wanted to kind of keep it grounded in reality a bit more. So I started in my imagination traveling around the world, thinking about islands. I think I considered Tasmania at one point, and
Oh, interesting, because you're
you know,
Australian by birth and
yes,
upbringing. And
that is right.
Tasmania is such a great word in and
It's
of itself. It's just extraordinary
It
word.
is, and it's also an extraordinary place. It's a place of kind of incredible wilderness in on such a tiny island, so much biodiversity. And it really does feel like the end of the world, even when you're from Australia. So that was tempting. I thought about an uninhabited island off Europe, perhaps, or an island in the South Pacific. But I think it was always inevitable that I would eventually land on Alcatraz. It's one of the world's most famous islands, and also, of course, one of the world's most notorious prisons. And the idea of this zoo being both a sanctuary and a prison was very appealing to me. So, yeah, that's where it came from. And I hadn't visited Alcatraz at that point, and I have visited several times since then. And the moment I set my foot on the shore of Alcatraz, I knew this is the place. Like, it's such a haunting and
Yes.
really wildly beautiful place.
Certainly haunting, and in the book it's really haunting. You mentioned as a throwaway line the last zoo in the world, but that's an idea that hasn't occurred to us. Most of us, if we think of the end of the world, think, oh, I don't know, nuclear bomb will all be
Right,
pulverized. And
right.
people are aware of, oh, climate change and the atmosphere, and things are not going well for how we're taking care of this planet. In your book, some dreadful things have happened, and we don't know exactly what, but the mainland is full of hunger and pollution of some kind. It's wonderful how vague you are. You don't try to turn us into scientists who say, oh, I don't think that could happen, or let me
Right.
Google that and see if she's right about the O2 level or something. We
Right.
just believe this world you've made in which th all but one other zoo have disappeared. And it's interesting because the other push me, pull you about zoos is that those of us who love them. I went briefly to Berlin recently, fairly recently, and the
Oh,
only thing I
same.
liked was
Yeah.
the zoo.
Yeah. Great city.
Sorry, Berliners, but I didn't love your city in hardly any way at all. But that's an amazing zoo, and I
It
got to
is.
see a giant panda
I was going to
on
say,
his,
did you see the giant
yes,
pandas? They're
sitting
very
on his
fun.
bench eating his eucalyptus. It was well worth the trip. And the gorillas and the chimpanzees have quite a good relationship with their keepers, and
Yeah.
they get thrown huge chunks of celery, and they all have a certain place where they hang out to grab it. Um,
Mhm.
but it also all know people, or maybe some of us have done it ourselves, who've gone into those mountains to go see the gorillas in Rwanda
Yeah.
or somewhere. So that's where they could still live. So you feel a bit bad, even for the celery eating gorilla in a very nice zoo. So
Totally.
zoos are, to my mind, you go there and you feel a guilty pleasure. And that's what the Island of Last Things is about, that this is the last zoo, except for the one in Paris, which
Yeah.
closes shortly before this becomes the very last zoo. Where
Yeah.
did you come up with the idea that zoos would go away before other things might go away on planet Earth? Why
I
zoos?
guess the idea was that much as we absolutely love and revere animals, and particularly certain types of animals, obviously our companion animals are very important to us, that there was also this idea that animals and the natural world is expendable, especially in the kind of face of like late stage capitalism, that you could imagine a world where we have let the extinction rate just become catastrophic
Yeah.
because there's other priorities that our society has put first over the natural world. Yeah, it just seemed believable to me. I think I've been reading a lot about extinction. There's an amazing book called The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert, I
Oh,
believe
yes.
name is, and she's a New Yorker writer. And that was this terrifying glimpse into what could be. And I think that was fairly inspiring as an idea that felt all too plausible. And one of the things she concentrates on is that it's not just the big charismatic animals that are disappearing, but this whole sort of world that we don't see every day, the bees, the insects, frogs, those kind of, what are they called? The species that let us know when the environment
Right.
is.
The canaries in the coal mine,
Yes,
but
exactly.
environmentally. Why did you? I believed everything in the book. I was like, oh my God, Emma's seen the future. It looks really
I hope not.
horrible. It's horrible. And we're plummeting in that direction. But why did you pick the Paris Zoo, which, having been to Paris endless times, I never went to the Paris Zoo. Is it a particularly good zoo? And I missed it?
No, you know what? I also have never been to the Paris Zoo, and I did take liberties with the Paris Zoo in terms of I think I talk about there's this big Art Deco clock outside the entrance, and that is not does not exist. I don't know. I think I just looked at the kind of world's major zoos, and it seemed reasonable that the larger zoos would have lasted longer than, say, some of the smaller, more regional ones. So I think Singapore, in the book, Singapore Zoo is another one that lasts a long time. That's where the elephant comes from.
The elephant who's not supposed to be able to mate with the
Right.
kind of elephant that's in this zoo, and yet a baby comes along. It's all, is that a good sign or not a good sign? I think and the book's a lot about revolution and
Mhm.
revolutionaries and someone willing to literally sacrifice their own life in order to stand up to what seems to them to be either a tyranny or
Mhm.
misguided. But of course, those people in their kind of suicidal fervor could also be misguided. We don't know that for sure. But you have made Sailor, the ex-zookeeper from Paris, a very intriguing, charismatic. We should all be more like her character. Is that what you think? Should we be more like Sailor and not passively going along the way the main protagonist is, just going along with the dreaded rules?
No, I try not to be too prescriptive as a novelist, but
Right. But on the other hand, it's a very powerful book. People want to take away something. What do you
right.
take away? Yes, prescriptive is a good word. Yeah, you're not there to preach.
Yes, I would never deign to tell people what to do, but I think I wanted to present these two facets, certainly from my own experience of how I feel about these issues, where I think a big part of my approach to animal conservation and the natural world aligns a bit more with Camille's, where I feel like in an ideal world, all of the animals would be able to live in the wild, live their free natural lives in the wild. We don't live in the ideal world. And
Right.
so for the world we live in, zoos do have this very important role to play in conservation and in animal welfare. Whereas Sailor takes a very different view of that. She is very hardline about it, and she feels that animals should lead free lives in the wild no matter what. And even if that means we don't get to interact with them. And I think there's a part of the book where Sailor's talking about this sanctuary, that there's a place she believes in where the animals roam free and where she and
Like
experience
Jonestown,
explore.
like a dream idea.
Yes, yes,
And then and your book has a lot of the political and financial machinations behind the scene that are always behind the
right,
scene, as you said. Do you
right,
call it late stage capitalism? I said, yeah, that's where we are, which could
right,
be the brink of the island of last things. But the idea that there are people pulling strings in ways we don't understand, I think is
right.
true of many things going on in our lives. The Chinese are seen as the good guys, but are they really the good guys? Or are they being manipulated by somebody else in this novel with these ideas that you've painted it so well that it's quite believable. I feel like we should email Emma. Did that? Oh, and what about why didn't they? And how about? But wait a minute, Emma just invented this whole thing. Let's have a reading. The chapter the begin. The chapters go between Paris in 5 years before and San Francisco now, which is where Alcatraz is. So you and I have picked out a couple of passages just to give people a feeling for the book. It's an you can't miss it novel because it's so unique and it will make you feel and think things you haven't thought and felt about before. So I don't know that we need to set up this passage that we've chosen, but if you want to, you certainly should.
I don't think so, apart from to say that this first passage is from Sailor's perspective. So Sailor is this character who arrives at the zoo and is a firebrand who,
Mhm.
right from the start, is trying to disrupt the way the zoo operates. And she becomes very close to our protagonist, Camille. And these sections are interspersed in little interstitials that are from Sailor's point of view, when the rest of the book is very much from Camille's point of view.
And in this one bit, Sailor has taken the ferry onto the mainland of San Francisco, which Camille has never done. And most
Yeah.
of the people that work on the zoo are basically prisoners there along with the animals. And they
Right,
are fed and cared for
right. And in
in
a way that
a way like the animals.
the island is a better place to be than the mainland in a lot of
Right.
ways, even though it is still a prison. Yes, and Sailor at this point is waiting for her passage to Alcatraz, so she has not yet joined the zoo. San Francisco. The city had changed since Sailor had last briefly seen it, the year before she left for Paris. She had a couple of weeks to kill until her contract at Alcatraz began, a chance to explore this last strange port before sailing to her new life. It was dirtier and poorer, like everywhere else, but the air of antic energy in the streets kindled a cautious hope in her. There was a resilience to the people here. The grim reality was threaded through with tiny, bright sense memories of being brought here as a child, joggling on her mother's lap as a cable car groaned its way up the hill, being fed some kind of rich fish soup from a spoon under a striped umbrella at a cafe, the pungent but pure smell of sweat rising off the steaming hide of a speckled deer at the zoo. So many things were gone, but others had taken their place. Hawker stalls sprang up like weeds on almost every street corner, a deep, fragrant, dirty fog emanating from their braziers of spices and dark oil used many times over. Despite its deterioration, she thought it was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen. A good feeling persisted from the call she'd had earlier with Anouk. The conversation had been one-sided and hurried. Anouk breathlessly letting Sailor know that a few animals had been successfully liberated from what remained of Paris Zoo to the sanctuary. That was all Anouk knew for now. It wasn't safe to talk on these open channels anyway. Take care, take care. And she abruptly hung up. But it was enough. It kept Sailor warm. She walked down to the Presidio. Because of the mold blight, there were few live trees left now, and in their place stood rows of carbon-capturing tree towers, a forest of glinting steel that lent the waterfront a sinister industrial air. People rifled through the small middens of plastic containers dotted around the shore, sliding choice pieces of plastic into carts and bags, and bickering with their neighboring selvages. Clouds of flies swarmed and settled, swarmed and settled. Occasionally a skirmish would break out. This had been a new development in Paris too, this renewed public passion for salvaging. Ever since the oil companies, for years sidelined by the renewables, bullied Kenya into accepting their plastic waste. The sluggish industry was revived, the factories resumed pumping out plastic crap, and the price you could get for bringing discarded packaging to the depots soared. Behind the hills of Marin, Sailor could see red smudges on the horizon where the perma-fires burned. As soon as one was extinguished, another would ignite. She assumed it would be that way until all the dead tree fuel was gone. A chain link fence had been erected surrounding what used to be a dog park, and Sailor stopped to look. Attached to the fence were hundreds of laminated posters and sheets of heavy card displaying faded photos of dogs, some with just a name below. Lucy, Artemis, Good Girl, Tiny Timmy, others with poems or long homages to the beloved pet. An array of candles lined the bottom of the fence, a memory wall. It reminded her of the weeks following a disaster when people would search for lost loved ones using any means available. Sailor had always been moved by these spontaneous monuments that sprang up around cities, the chilling way they changed from bulletin boards to shrines over time.
That's wonderful, and I think gives people such a clear idea of the bleakness that you imagine and then depict, including the fact that mold, which is something that's never crossed my mind, and you must have researched that and discovered that perhaps mold will kill all the trees, given the other bad things in the environment, and the idea that trees become these glistening steel towers and
Mhm.
perma-fires. These sort of images and ideas, the color of things, the smell of things, the memory of real things as they used to be, is throughout the book. And I think while it's propelled by the story of the zoo and the visitors
Mhm.
who go to great lengths and spend great amount of money and take tons of selfies because they
Mhm.
get to see the very last cheetah, the very last lion, as a kind of a trophy hunters of a kind, like people on safaris now do, take pictures.
Yeah,
No one's ever seen a picture of a lion before. But the idea that, soon there won't be any and I got a picture. There's so
yeah.
many ideas in this book, Emma, that one rides the wave of your words, but you do have to stop periodically and think, wow, really? That's what it's going to be like? And how much longer do we have before it goes that bad? Do you have any idea of that yourself? Do you think this is 100 years in the future, 50 years? What do you imagine, or is that irrelevant?
I think it probably is irrelevant in a way. Obviously, on a personal level, I hope that this world does not come to pass.
Yeah,
And I think, like most dystopian fiction, I think authors are just playing with ideas about what could happen. And sometimes they are cautionary tales. And I think there is an element of that in this, in the kind of degradation, the various crises that are facing this planet and all of the beings that are trying to live on it. I certainly did quite a bit of research, and in choosing this idea of the blights, as I call them, the mold and the fungus, there is certainly some sort of scientific, fairly terrifying scientific possibility of that, I guess. There are certain funguses that are becoming resistant to antifungal medications.
yeah.
And so it's not like completely out of the realm of possibility. And I think the sort of speculative fiction that I like always does play in that space where, everything that you depict is potentially possible. I know Margaret Atwood is very famous for her dystopian works are always based on every detail, horrific detail is based on something that has happened or is happening in our world somewhere.
Makes it
Um,
that much more believable.
right.
This dog park that you depict is now not functioning as a dog park because you don't explain what's happened to the dogs, but this becomes a memorial and a shrine to them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you leave out domestic pets because they're no longer part of the picture. Or
I think there's
just scrapping to survive.
I think there's one scene where Sailor sees someone driving by in a limousine with a pet rat at the window.
Yes.
There are hints that perhaps very wealthy people still do have domestic animals, but for the large part, they're pretty much gone. And I spent a summer in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and I was dog sitting this delightful Labradoodle called Maggie. Hi, Maggie, if you're out there. And we were at a dog park, and it was very busy, and obviously lots of dogs there. And I was in the middle, immersed in writing this book, and I just thought, what would it be like if there were no dogs left? What would a dog park look like? And this kind of very poignant vision came to me of one of those memorial walls where people, it starts off as missing people posters.
Right.
And so I love that idea. I lived in New York for a long time. And when we first got to New York City, it was 2004. And it was close enough to 9/11 that there was still, excuse me, walls like fences around the city, those chain link fences that had these sort of fading missing person photographs on them. And that was always so poignant to walk past those. That scene very much kind of encompasses that as well.
I felt that because we all were aware of those images of those fences and people's pictures and the idea that there had not been anyone to save.
And then they became memorials after
Yes,
that.
exactly.
Yeah.
I picked out one more passage for you to read, and we just have time for it.
Great.
And it's really about the idea of zoos in general.
Great.
You've obviously spent a great deal of time thinking about, and it's a great deal of what the book's about, and therefore it means about animals in general. So do read it so people understand how many good ideas there are in the Island of Last Things.
Thank you, Tracie. There's a common perception about animals in captivity that's been around way longer than the quarter century I've been alive, and will no doubt exist until this island crumbles into the sea, that small enclosures are horrifically cruel. But here's a zookeeper secret. Some animals like small spaces. There are certain creatures that will wither away in captivity, great white sharks, migratory birds, because they don't think like we do. They think in terms of continents and oceans, and they cannot be separated from their instinct to roam. But plenty of others seem content to lead sedentary lives and never display signs of restlessness or cabin fever. They can even become lazy, which is why enrichment is so important. Given half a chance, an animal whose material needs are met will take the opportunity to sleep more. They're like humans in that way. Sailor and I came up with precise calculations. If in the wild, a creature would normally spend, say, 10 hours a day sleeping, but in the zoo environment, they're able to sleep for 15 hours, then we need to keep them awake and occupied for those 5 hours to give them a chance to act out their natural behaviors insofar as that's possible. Of course, there are exceptions, and they tend to be tragic. The jaguar, the lone wolf, the elephants forever searching for their lost matriarch. Perhaps I've given the impression that Sailor and I were in complete accord when it came to the animals, but our philosophies often diverged. Sailor wouldn't agree that some animals thrive in small enclosures. She also wouldn't accept that the animals loved us and sought out our company, no matter how we wanted to believe it so. She felt it was okay for us to love them, crucial even, but where we slipped up was expecting that love to be requited.
It's just a beautiful ending to our conversation because I think we are confused about that even with our domestic animals. What we need and what they need are all
Right.
quite different things. It's a book of great ideas, not last ideas, but The Island of Last Things is about what could happen if we don't think thoughtfully and we don't pay more attention to what's going on around us and the world as we know it. Thank you so much, Emma Sloley, for this book, for your great imagination, and I hope that the next book won't be dystopian.
No, it
That's
won't.
good.
I've said I'm moving away from dystopia
You did
now.
a great job. Now can you do something about here and now?
Right. It's going to be so hopeful the
A
next
little
one.
cheerier. Thank you so much. It really is a wonderful book, and it's been great to spend time with you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tracie. I appreciate it. I love being here.